Good morning, folks. This is Deb. So I want to start to answer some of the questions that viewers of the channel have been asking. I'm going back in time for this one because I actually almost forgot it, but it raises a good point. And the question was, and I don't have it. I'm obviously talking about this from memory. Okay, I don't actually have the piece in front of me, but the question was, if Caitlyn Clark goes to the New York Liberty, will Brianna Stewart and Sabrina Ionescu be able to protect her from the league uh, and from other players and from the referees? So let's talk about that in the broad context. First of all, Caitlyn Clark was seen talking in a hallway with during the All-Star festivities with the coach of the the coach of the New York Liberty, and Brianna Stewart. Caitlyn Clark's agent was also present, and Sabrina Ionescu was within earshot of this meetup. Nobody really knows what that was about because the Liberty coach was actually coaching the All-Star game that was going to be played during that weekend. Now, certainly, I think we can all agree that future plans are often made early in the process. Okay, maybe the intent of this was somewhere down the road. Caitlyn Clark, when she's done with her Fever contract, could go to the New York Liberty. I've also heard it said that Caitlyn Clark was trying to recruit Ionescu to come to the Fever since she is a free agent. So nobody really knows what this conversation was about, and it's not unusual for Caitlyn Clark's agent to be present because there was actually a meeting on the CBA at the same time during the break. So that's number one. Number two, the notion that Caitlyn Clark needs to be protected. I'm not sure that Caitlyn Clark views it that way, okay? She has complained about the referees, and I certainly think the referees are the problem. They have allowed the games to get out of control, okay? And certainly something needs to be done about it. I have repeated this over and over again. I've created a petition so that the fans can be heard, okay? I have given the fans who follow this channel the avenues they need to be able to send messages to the WNBA brass. Okay, I've encouraged them to write letters. Snail mail. Snail mail means a lot. Okay, when you take the time to do something like that, it's often viewed as coming from people who care about the subject. But the notion that we should allow games to get out of control while we continually fight back and forth with players and argue with referees is ludicrous on its face, okay? First of all, what happened with Sophie Cunningham, yes, okay, we all jumped up and down and called her, the enforcer. But that should not have to be the case in this league, okay? She admitted herself that it was an impulse to do what she did, and she sent a message. And, I think when you're in those kinds of situations, you sometimes do that, and sometimes it will have an effect on players who may be thinking about targeting Clark with rough play. I don't think, however, as in baseball, that pitchers should be throwing at batters' heads. I think that it is a recipe for disaster, okay? When you have somebody who defends a player in a foul situation, it's often the people who respond with retaliation who are thrown out of games. Now, do I think Marina Mabrey should have been thrown out of the game when she knocked Caitlyn Clark down after our little friend there from Connecticut, who is now no longer with Connecticut, poked her in the eye, J.C. Shelton? I do. I think J.C. Shelton committed a flagrant 2 foul and should have been ejected immediately. I think Marina Mabrey should have been ejected immediately. Tina Charles should never have gotten involved, but she didn't have an opportunity to do anything because Marina Mabrey jumped in and took care of that for her. So, no, I don't think Tina Childs should have been ejected. The notion that we should have teammates beating up on players to retaliate is not a good one, okay? And yet, I think this league is going through its growing pains, and I don't think people remember a lot of things that went on in the NBA. Does anybody remember Malice in the Palace? Does anyone remember that game and what happened during Malice in the Palace? We have a bunch of talking head experts who are also people who follow the NBA out there, and I hesitate to say that they're misogynists, but they pretend to be experts on all of this, and yet they don't raise the issue of Malice in the Palace when they talk about the stuff. They call the WNBA a thug league. Well, let's talk about Malice in the Palace for a few minutes. November 19, 2004, a game between the, oddly enough, Indiana Pacers and the Detroit Pistons erupted into an outright brawl that required the game to be suspended immediately. Okay? Ron Artest, who played for the Pacers, committed a flagrant foul against Ben Wallace, who played for the Pistons. He then shoved Artest, and while Artest was on the scorer's table, he was hit by a beer thrown by a fan. This resulted in players leaving the floor and going into the stands and creating a brawl. It then came back onto the floor, with fans coming down onto the floor, throwing things at the players, okay? The game was suspended immediately, and it required significant police presence to stop this thing, okay? Now, 9 players were suspended for a total of 149 games. The person receiving the largest suspension was Ron Artest, who received an 86-game suspension. That is the longest in NBA history. Stephen Jackson received a 30-game suspension. Jermaine O'Neal received a 15-game suspension. The players lost $11 million in income as a result of fines and suspensions, okay? 5 players and 5 fans were charged in this altercation, okay? And the whole event resulted in a change in the way players and fans interacted. There were new security protocols, increased number of security guards. There were restrictions on the sales of alcohol to fans in the stands, and it instituted a player dress code, which was very, very controversial at the time. It required players to wear shirts, dress pants, closed-toe shoes, no sleeveless shirts, no baggy clothes, no chains, no do-rags or hats when participating in league or team business. Why do you think that was done? I can tell you exactly why. It was done to clean up the thug image that the NBA had at the time. Now, this became controversial, of course, and it was cited as an attack on black players. Actually, everybody survived all of this, and it actually instituted a new NBA fashion trend. And all I'm saying is, we don't need incidents like this. We don't need fans throwing things on the court during WNBA games. We've been there before. They should be prosecuted. They should be thrown out of the arena for that kind of stuff. Okay? You know, if they're just yelling or, laughing at a player, no, they shouldn't be thrown out. But if they are yelling nasty, evil things, that's a whole different story, because they're inciting situations that nobody wants. They should not be throwing anything from anywhere in the stands. Okay? This is all I'm saying is everybody needs to keep their head with this. Okay? We don't need to start vigilante sports to control something that should be controlled by the referees. People will be people. There will be flagrant fouls. Okay? If they are taken care of in the moment, we can avoid all of this Malice in the Palace kind of stuff, okay? That was in 2004. It's literally 21 years ago, and we haven't seen anything like it since. And nobody has suffered any deleterious effects because of the changes that were made in the league. But changes must be made in the WNBA if we're going to avoid this kind of stuff. Because Sophie Cunningham should not have had to do what she did at the end of that Connecticut game. Okay, the game was in hand by then. It was literally over. It finally, what Sophie Cunningham did ended up in Marina Mabrey being tossed from the game. But in fact, Marina Mabrey should have been tossed from the game far earlier than that. So I don't think that Caitlyn Clark views herself as needing vigilante protection. Okay, I don't. Do I think it's important for players to step in when a player is being physically, assaulted? And Caitlyn Clark certainly has been. I've seen Lexi Hull get in between them without taking any kind of retaliatory action. I agree that that is fine. Okay? I've seen Aaliyah Boston pull Caitlyn Clark away during those moments. And that is all totally acceptable and understandable. But to think that we need to come up with some kind of vigilante protection for Caitlyn Clark is absurd. What we really need to do is get the WNBA to address the problem with refereeing. And once we do that, you will see a lot less of this. And it's not just Caitlyn Clark now getting this kind of treatment. There are other players. I've seen Aaliyah Boston get slammed to the ground. Okay? We saw Lexi Hull. Her head had a knot on it the size of a softball the other night after she got hit. All of this stuff needs to stop. And, swinging your elbows under the basket is a foul. Okay? It's a foul, no matter what league you're playing in. So if we can get to that point, we have half the battle won. I don't think it's the role of players to protect players from pathetic officiating and from hard fouls being made by other players. They have referees for that. That's what their jobs essentially are. So again, I'm going to say this. The referees need to become employees of the WNBA. No more contracting freelance referees on a game-by-game basis. They need to be thoroughly trained in the WNBA rules. They need to address the issues during the game. No more upgrading fouls after the game. They have the same film available during the game that they do after the game. It can be taken care of during the actual game. If there is a flagrant 2 or above, it's immediate suspension from the game. Okay? If we get to the point where we're calling routine fouls, which we still don't count, we don't call very well, we may be able to have players who actually foul out of games. That's the same norm in the NBA as it is in the WNBA. 6 fouls and you sit down. I've seen it once this year. And not very often beyond that. And I can't believe that there haven't been times when it should have been 6 fouls and out. So all of these things need to be addressed. I have a petition. It will again be in the body of this video. It is struggling to get signatures. The only way this changes is if more than the players and the coaches complain. It has to come from the fans. So you need to address all of these things to the WNBA and make your voices heard. I do not know, honestly, if this is part of the CBA negotiations. I will take a look at that over the next couple of days. But certainly, it should be in there somewhere. This should be part of the conversation. And it should also be brought up, by the way, with the league, with the referees have their own CBA and league union, and it can be brought up with them as well. And that should also be part of the conversation. So I will talk to you guys later. I will be answering a couple of more questions from fans over the weekend. Again, I welcome your comments. I do look at them. And we're going to talk a little bit more also about opportunities that Caitlyn Clark has turned down in favor of the WNBA, but that's for a separate video. So I will talk to you guys later when I get back from work tonight. Have a good day.